Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Dan Pardi on the line, and he is Chief Health Officer over at Qualia Life Sciences. Dan, welcome to the show.
Adam, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Dan. So we got a lot to talk about today. So we're going to talk about the future of cellular renewal and regenerative health. Definitely want to get into talking about some stem cells. I feel like I haven't talked about that in a couple of weeks at least, maybe a little bit longer on the show. So excited to get into that. But before we do, I'm just curious about your background. So how did you get started on this path to regenerative health? Like, where did all that begin to you?
That's a great question. My interest in health started when I was young. The way that thinking back on that origin moment, I was an athlete. I injured myself playing sports, and I wanted to figure out from a young age how to get back onto the court or the field. So I started to pay attention to my body probably earlier than most, but that did lead to a real sincere interest in the human body, physiology, biology, and how we can use science and information and even ancient wisdom to nudge ourselves in the right direction, to get ourselves back to a healthy state. And so that led to sort of this long academic path where I ended up getting a master's in exercise physiology. I was really interested in body weight regulation at that time from a physiological perspective. Then I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for almost a decade in medical affairs. And that company that I worked for had a drug for narcolepsy. And so I learned a tremendous amount about sleep and the neurocircuitry involved in that particular condition. And then that led to me doing a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from Leiden University in the Netherlands and Stanford. And it was around that time when I was starting my work where I knew that I didn't want to become a sleep researcher, but wanted to work more in public health and look at all the different determinants, everything that affects the health of our body. And there's not really a position in society that is like an expert generalist in all those different determinants. And so I charted my own path. I created my own, basically like a digital health tool online called HumanOS at humanos.me. And the idea was, how do we make this really juicy, interesting information accessible? Something that I identified is that this information that does help us can be locked behind jargon, behind complexity. And so my goal was, how do we bring that to the masses so that anybody who is interested in this stuff, which I think is most of us, can feel like they're making progress on this information? Because the alternative to that, Adam, is that there's so much coming out that it feels totally overwhelming, and that every time there's something new to learn, it just feels like just yet another thing that we have to try to understand, and it does feel overwhelming. So that was the goal, is how do we make this a lot more accessible, simpler, so that people feel like they're really making progress. And worked on that for multiple years, and then moved down to Austin to become the Chief Health Officer for a company called Restore Hyper Wellness. And then now I'm the Chief Health Officer for Qualia Life Sciences. So a big part of my role is doing exactly what my mission has been. How do we help communicate about the therapeutic areas that we're working in, and also specifically about the formulations that we've created and why we think they're so interesting.
So I want to take it I'm curious about right now. So when we think about the longevity space and a lot of attention being, and I don't know if it's just because I'm in Southern California and this is all everybody talks about or what, but I feel like, are we in like a renaissance of people caring about health on a new level? Because I feel like we're having conversations now that are much different than we did once upon a time in the past. So I'm just curious, just overall, like what you're seeing, because you live this day in and day out.
Yeah, you've nailed it. There's always been an interest in how we can preserve youthful function, and the goal of trying to stay alive longer, stay healthier for longer has been with us for a very long time. The renaissance is that we've now made legitimate scientific progress on how to do exactly that. Where before, early on, I have a podcast as well, Humanized Radio, and I spoke with one of the luminaries in the space, and he was talking about his journey. This is Mike West, who started the company Geron. And he said when he was interested to go into studying aging specifically during his PhD, his mentor said, you're going to kill your career. There's no future there. And the point of that was that it wasn't considered a legitimate science to study aging directly. Then probably in the late 90s, but early 2000s, we started to see real progress. We started to see some interventions that did extend the lifespan and health span, which is around where the term health span came into the public eye, where we could see in model organisms, their lives were being elongated through some genetic manipulation, change in their diet, addition of some sort of compound, and that added legitimacy to the space of what we now call geroscience. And geroscience is different than gerontology, which is, of course, working with older people to help them with their specific needs. Geroscience is looking to study the specific pathways that contribute to aging to see if we can intervene.
Real quick before we move on, I love the support and to other podcasters on the show. So I want you to say that name again, but a little bit more slowly. I know you didn't ask for this, but I'm doing the plug because I love supporting other podcasters, and I definitely want my audience to go check it out. So what was the name of your show again, please?
Thanks. Yeah, so the name of that show is Human OS Radio. And I'm not actively recording many shows there now, but I've got close to 100 shows with professors, and I'll tell you about why I started it. At the time, around 2014, when I did start it, I felt there was something missing in the space, and that was a direct conversation with the people doing the research. There were people commenting on health and science, but they might be people that read papers and then were good communicators. I wanted to go right to the source and say, okay, you did this study. What motivated you to do it? What stimulated you to do it? Tell me about it. And so in that, I covered all sorts of different topics from sleep. We became the official podcast of the Sleep Research Society, even though we weren't focused just on that, but we would do a lot of shows on that topic. And now, personally, I'm doing more guest appearances talking about geroscience. So my own evolution has, brought me here today. But it's really fun to get out there. And, so am I a scientist? Well, scientists do experiments. And so I'm not doing many experiments these days. I really see myself as a health communicator, health translator. And I think that's a missing but super valuable role in society, especially because there is an awakening that we cannot outsource all of our health to experts. Right? You have to know enough about health to learn ideas that then affect your pattern of living, so that you navigate your day a little bit differently, or a lot differently. And so we now know that we need to help people understand this really good information so that they can use that to direct how they live. And that's why things like this are so valuable. Conversations like we're having today are going to be so valuable for your listeners.
I want to switch back to some of what you're doing present day over at Quality of Life Sciences. So maybe let's start a little basic. So what are stem cells and how can they support long-term health and vitality? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating field, and I think there's a lot of potential. So the market size was estimated in about 2024 to be about $15 billion. And by 2030, it's estimated to be closer to $30 billion. And the reason for that is because the science is advanced. And so we see things like medical stem cell therapies. I'll talk about that. And then what we're doing is really trying to support stem cell health, which is different. But let's start with what stem cells are in the first place. These are cells that are the primary part of your repair system in the body. And so each stem cell has these unique characteristics where it can divide and create a clone of itself, so making another stem cell. But then the other daughter cell that it creates is called a progenitor cell. And that cell is destined to become some other specific type of tissue with a specific type of function. So you can replace muscle cells and liver cells. There's even neural stem cells. So we have these stem cell pools all throughout our body, and think of them, the analogy that I like to use is think of a lump of clay, a lump of wet clay, and that clay can be molded into a cup or a plate or a pitcher. And once it becomes that new thing and it hardens, then it is what it is. It's locked in what we call its cell fate. But this ability for the body to regenerate in this way is a fundamental component of our health. And the reason why we're interested in this in the geroscience space is because one of the hallmarks of aging, or the characteristics that have been identified in the early 2010s as a hallmark of aging, are these reliable characteristics that we see across species that are a part of the aging process. Stem cell exhaustion is one of those hallmarks. And what we see is that stem cells, in essence, become less good at doing their job. And the reasons for that are manifold, very complex, and really interesting to explore. So if you think, Adam, it makes any sense, I can talk a little bit about just what the life cycle is of a stem cell so you see what its journey is.
Yeah, do that, please.
I'll do it quick, yeah. So stem cells mostly spend their time in hibernation. We call it a quiescent state. And it's actually really important for them to stay in that state. It's one of the reasons why they're called, another nickname for them is forever cells. They are some of the longest lived cells in the body. And that is because they have, in this hibernating state, they have very, very low metabolism, and they're very good at protecting their proteins that they make. So they don't develop a lot of protein toxicity, which is another thing that can happen when you get older. Is the proteins just don't fold the same, right? So if you think of a protein as being like a lock that has to fit into a specific keyhole, or excuse me, a key that fits into a keyhole, then the shape of that key matters for it to be functioning. And better than every other cell in the body, stem cells protect that protein process really, really well. It's part of why they're so long living. But they don't just stay in that hibernating state. They do wake up, and there are these signals that will cause them to get up out of bed, if you will, and then get into circulation, and then they undergo a process of homing. So areas where you might have damage, like let's say twisted an ankle. I mean, there's little micro damage that's happening all the time, but if we use more of an example that we can feel or see is, let's say you have a bit of damage and you need to repair that, there are signals that are released from those tissues. And those signals are basically a homing beacon for stem cells to get into the circulation and find their way to that site. And the body, depending on the level of damage, if there's a tiny little bit of damage in a cell, the cell might try to fix it. But mostly, if the damage is significant enough, the body wants to clear the damage and then replace it with new tissue. And that's where stem cells come in. So they, how do they know what to become? Well, they go into that tissue, they find their way there, and then they listen to signals in the environment. And those signals will tell it, okay, become this particular type of cell. And it takes weeks for that process to happen. But it'll now become this new joint tissue, cartilage or a ligament or a muscle cell or a fat tissue, or all different things it can become. And so with the process of aging and stem cell exhaustion, we actually maintain our stem cells really well, but they can't hear the signals. Either they stay in hibernation too long, they're hard to wake up, or the opposite is also true. Sometimes they're too arousable. They're waking up too easily and getting into circulation, which exhausts your pool. Or they get into the tissue, and the tissue just doesn't have the right signals. It can't hear the signals properly because of increased inflammation that occurs with aging. We call that inflammaging. And as a result, either it can't become that new tissue, or in other cases, it can actually become something it shouldn't be. So, for instance, one thing that we do see with older people is that a muscle stem cell might become a fibroblast or a scar tissue. So now an older person, their muscles are not getting replaced with healthy muscle tissue, but instead scar tissue. And imagine a 90-year-old person where they're very stiff and hard to move and hunched over, that their muscles have a lot more scar tissue in them. And that is the process of those stem cells they're not replacing that damaged tissue as you once were when you were younger.
And so go a little bit further into what Quality of Life Sciences is doing in advancing this in this space and to improve aging and performance. Like, talk about quality of life a bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the company has a unique approach to creating solutions that are aimed to address some interesting therapeutic areas. So the company started working on a nootropic, which is a brain-enhancing, thinking-enhancing supplement. Now, instead of finding just one or two ingredients that have evidence for them to support a part of the cognitive process, some of which there are many, right? Instead, the goal of the company, they took 2 years to formulate their first product, said, how do we support the entire system? And so we're going to look to see how do we provide precursors for neurotransmitter synthesis? How do we look at different plant compounds that might affect how long we can keep neurotransmitters active in the synapse? How do we reduce oxidative stress and inflammation that can interfere with thinking quality? How do we augment blood flow to the brain? So that system-based approach was the origin of the company, and it stuck with us. So all other products that we've now created take that same approach. How do we support the whole system to do its job? We are very much about supporting the natural wisdom of the body. So we're not going to try to override it, but we're going to try to help it do its job. And that same perspective is exactly what we took in what we're doing with stem cells. And so I wanted to walk through some of the life cycle component of what a stem cell does, because when we get older, every single aspect of that, where it's residing in its niche, getting into circulation, finding its way to the target tissue, becoming that new functioning cell, and then surviving, right? Actually living long enough, being strong enough to survive. Those are all opportunities for us to try to address. And so our formulation team I joined the company over the summer, and I've just been so impressed with the amount of research that they do. Prior to, we screened 50 to 100 different compounds that have evidence for them in preclinical and clinical work to say, okay, these do have a positive effect on some part of the stem cell process. Now comes the art of formulation. So imagine groups of PhDs sitting in a room and talking about ways to utilize the most effective combination of molecules that then and compounds that can support stem cells being healthy. And the really exciting news is that it comes from outside of our own work, but motivated us to step into this area, is that we see some work from Irina Convoy at UC Berkeley, somebody that I interviewed back in 2017 on my own show, is that when you actually can affect the environment, like we don't lose a tremendous amount of stem cells, we do lose some with aging, but it's really that they just can't hear the right signals. So imagine a person who's hard of hearing. And let's say you and I are speaking at a volume and we can hear each other, but that other person, we're saying the same words, but that other person who's hard of hearing can't distinguish the words that we're saying. But they're there, right? That person is there, has ears. And so in some ways, it's a bit of an analogy, but we're trying to raise the volume of some of the signals so that the stem cells can hear the signals and then do their job. And we're doing that through, again, a variety of these natural compounds that, frankly, we have a diet. Even if you're eating a good diet, you're probably not eating the same level of diversity that our hunter-gatherer ancestors consumed. And so we have this huge pharmacopoeia of plant compounds in nature, and we're missing a lot of those. And so when you find the right ones that do a particular task and you formulate them so that people are getting the right dose and they're absorbed right, remarkable things can happen. So the other thing that attracted me to join the company is that on every single product that we put into the market, we test. So we do testing, with humans. We won an award from the Nutrition Business Journal just this year, which we're really proud of, and as a leader of science and innovation. And so, for example, with our product that is aimed at supporting NAD, which is a different product, we've done now 4 clinical trials. So we usually start with something that is just survey-based to see how people like it, do they feel it, which is really important, right? Do you notice this? And then we went on to do single and 2 double-blind controlled trials, and that is our approach and philosophy. So support the whole system and then actually test to see if what we aim to do is what we're actually accomplishing.
Well, I'll tell you, Dan, this has been great having you on the show today. I know this has just opened my mind to a lot of possibilities in the space, number one, but then love the work you're doing over at Quality of Life Sciences, and happy to bring that to my audience as well. That being said, if somebody's listening or watching this and if they want to follow up and they want to follow your work, again, I got to plug the podcast again, and then also just to connect. How do they do that?
Yeah, so I go to qualitylife.com. And in my department, the Health Sciences Department, we're working on creating really good scientific blog content, So you can find our blog there, you can see our studies, you can investigate the products. One thing that I'm very excited about is we are combining products into protocols. We know with the hallmarks of aging, there is not going to be a singular product that addresses aging, but rather, if you can pinpoint parts of the aging process like stem cell exhaustion, how do we target these in a specific way? And you'll notice that with our stem cell product, you're only taking it 4 days a month. You're not taking it all every day forever. And because we want to, again, what we were saying earlier, how important it is for stem cells to remain in hibernation. So this idea that you provide this regenerative pulse once a month, and then how other products that we have support that whole process. In the future, those who are really interested in supporting their own health span, it is very likely that their supplement strategy will be multi-pronged. So I would say follow our work there, see the blogs. We'll take one ingredient and do a deep dive on that, so you can see like more information about the specifics. But yes, that's what we're really looking forward to in the future, and where you can find more work from me and others on the team.
Mm. And for everybody listening, just so you know, we'll definitely put some links and some contact info in the show notes. You can just click on it and head right on over. And speaking to the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show, each and every day, bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way on your journey as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow button. And Dan, man, thanks again for coming on.
Adam, thanks for having me. It was great to chat with you.